Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola. I'm the editor of the Dissenter newsletter and also the author of the book Guilty of Journalism, The Political Case Against Julian Assange. And I welcome you to this broadcast. Sorry for the little bit of a delay in getting started, but I'm here to break down and discuss what we can expect with this appeal hearing tomorrow. And I'm happy to take your comments, respond to any questions that you might have. And we have time now to get into what to expect with Day X. Day X is here. Day X is what supporters and press freedom advocates dubbed this hearing because it is a final opportunity for Julian Assange to stop extradition to the United States. This is probably the last public hearing in the United Kingdom, according to his lawyers and according to Stella, Julian Assange's wife. This is what they have said. They have said that this 2-day hearing where they will go before the British High Court of Justice and present some grounds for appeal is going to be a huge moment in the case. They're going to try to convince the High Court, which already overturned a lower court's decision back in 2021. They're going to try to convince the High Court of Justice to give Julian Assange a full appeal hearing later, sometime this year. And if they say no, he doesn't have any avenue left in the British legal system to challenge extradition. What would happen next is that Julian Assange would probably try to submit an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. But if they don't accept the petition, it's a special kind of petition, then it's pretty immediate. Julian Assange would be extradited to the United States. And so we don't know. We have no idea what the ruling will be. His legal team says they don't know when it will come. It could be at the end of the hearing. It could be a day after. It could be a week or so. It could be a matter of weeks. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here. As people are joining the stream, again, my name is Kevin Gosztola. I'm a reporter who has covered this case extensively. Although this time, I'm not going to have access to the proceedings. The UK Administrative Court Office has denied all journalists and reporters in the United States and Australia access to the remote feed for the court proceedings, even though in the past that had been how several journalists had covered. Rather than spend thousands of dollars to get to London, rather than try to cram in, they have limited capacity for journalists there in London. Rather than do that, a number of journalists throughout the world had taken advantage of this remote feed that had been set up, allegedly to support open justice. I'm still going to be able to cover the proceedings. I'm just going to do it through a reporter who was hired. I'll be sharing their work with the Dissenter. So now's a good time. If you're not a subscriber, go to thedissenter.org. It's a free newsletter. You'll want to read the reporting that comes out tomorrow on Tuesday, February 20th. The following day, there will be a report on February 21st. There'll be full coverage of both days of this appeal hearing in the Assange extradition case. And throughout the past 10 days, I've been building towards this hearing by doing a countdown to Day X. I already said what Day X means, why it was called Day X. Let's get into how we got here. I think it's important for people to understand at what stage we are in the case. I'm not going to go all the way back to 2010 when the documents were first published, but that is a part of understanding the case. The passage of time is an important aspect of this case. What I want to do is make sure everyone understands where we are in the extradition proceedings. Julian Assange was arrested on April 11th, 2019. He was expelled from the Ecuador's embassy in London. The British police came into the embassy. They dragged him out. There's video out there of him being hauled and dragged into a police van. It was quite dramatic. Julian Assange was taken to Belmarsh maximum security prison, and this facility has been sometimes referred to as Britain's Guantanamo. In Belmarsh, he has been detained for nearly 5 years. Also, in some way or another, and even as a United Nations working group recognized, he has been in some form of arbitrary detention or detention. You don't even have to give it that label. He has been in some form of detention now since the end of 2010. So this is a individual whose mental and physical health has deteriorated greatly over the last 10 to 15 years. He submitted his appeals. His legal team submitted their appeals. There was a full extradition proceeding in 2020. It was disrupted by the COVID pandemic. But before a district court, before District Judge Vanessa Baretzer, there was a legal hearing that I attended in person. I was there in London for this full week where arguments were made about the law and whether issues of the law said that Julian Assange should be barred from extradition. So they went over the extradition treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom's law that governs extradition, and those arguments were rather dry. What they were building up toward was they were building up towards a full hearing, a more of a kind of trial where witnesses would come forward and testify in court. But that didn't happen in May as a result of the pandemic. It got pushed to September 2020. That whole entire month of September was this proceeding that was a lot like a trial. And although it's not exactly the most accurate term, the way I refer to that month is an extradition trial. There were witnesses that were called. There were witnesses that submitted statements. All sorts of aspects related to extradition were brought before the judge. And essentially, it was the defense putting the US government on trial for trying to extradite a publisher in this unprecedented case. So we went through all sorts of issues that involved, the risk of cruel and inhuman treatment, that involved the threat to freedom of expression or the violation of his rights to freedom of expression, and political motivations that drove the case, abuses of process, and went down the list. And people who testified, they were journalists, individuals who were longtime supporters and prosecuted under the Espionage Act, like Daniel Ellsberg, was someone who testified in court. His testimony was incredible. And then there were scholars, there were people who were attorneys who contributed testimony. There were people who gave important testimony about the prison system and how jails treat detainees before trial. That evidence ended up being very influential to Vanessa Baretzer because in January in 2021, the first few days of January, she ended up ruling that it would be oppressive for mental health reasons, because of his mental health condition, to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. And so with that, they proceeded onward. Now his legal team was in the winning position, entirely unexpected. The United States government had to find a way to save the case from being lost. And what they did is the US State Department came up with these so-called diplomatic assurances that they offered to the UK government to try and reassure the courts as well as the government that this treatment and abuse that was presented in the court, that it is not systematic, and even if it was, they would make sure that Julian Assange did not get abused. So they would take certain steps. And these diplomatic assurances all had glaring loopholes in them. And the most important thing was that they were not offered before the extradition trial was ended. They were not offered before Vanessa Barretzer gave her ruling. They were offered after the fact, after it was clear that they needed to be shared with the courts, because the US was now desperate. They were worried they were going to lose an extradition case in the UK because the US prison system is inhumane. And so what they did is they put these assurances before the High Court of Justice, and the High Court of Justice wound up accepting them. And we could get into some of those issues. They certainly are important to the proceedings, but that litigation happened. And in December of 2021, now, the Assange legal team was back on the losing end. The US had won. The lower extradition decision was overturned. It was now the conclusion of the High Court of Justice that it would not be oppressive for mental health reasons to extradite Julian Assange, defying a body of evidence that had been persuasive to the district judge. And we went into 2022 with Julian Assange asking the UK Supreme Court to hear an appeal. They sought permission to appeal. And then afterwards, they were told that there might be one important aspect of law that the Supreme Court would review, and it was considered. And then they said, well, we really aren't going to hear your appeal. So his appeal was shut down. The door was slammed shut, and they ordered the extradition to be sent back to the district judge, or the district court. That district court, that British district court, the lowest level court, was instructed to send the extradition request immediately to the UK government for authorization. In other words, on this date, this happened around June in 2022. This was when we saw the extradition be officially authorized by the British government to the United States. And at that moment, because of the way everything had unfolded, it was now the first chance that Julian Assange had, through his legal team, to challenge parts of District Judge Vanessa Barretzer's decision that were concerning. Things that had to do with press freedom, for example. She got a lot wrong in relation to how he has been targeted for his political opinions. She got details wrong related to the issues of the First Amendment and whether his rights would be upheld under the First Amendment if he was extradited to the United States. The right to a fair trial, she took for granted some of the arguments that were raised by the defense. And then this issue of the passage of time and the way that this case had unfolded, that was something that she just cast aside. All the concerns. She did not accept the narrative of Assange's attorneys that President Obama had not indicted Julian Assange when he could have after prosecuting Chelsea Manning. After the U.S. military prosecuted Chelsea Manning, it was certainly possible and it seemed logical that the Justice Department could move forward with prosecuting Julian Assange. But we've heard very clearly, and it made perfect sense, that if they were going to prosecute Julian Assange under the laws of the United States, it would then mean that the reporters and editors who worked on the WikiLeaks documents at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other media organizations like The Guardian, for example, no matter the acrimony, the tension, the issues, the personality problems that happened in between them on those documents, all of those organizations would be subject to a prosecution. And that was not a step that the Justice Department was willing to take at that time under Obama. These were described as First Amendment issues. Those First Amendment issues when President Donald Trump was elected and he selected to be the Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He selected to be CIA Director Mike Pompeo. With those people there, with change of personnel, a change of attitude in the National Security Division of the Justice Department, those First Amendment issues were no longer something that held back Donald Trump's administration from aggressively pursuing leakers, but also from stepping across this boundary that had been set, crossing the Rubicon, so to speak, and going forward and pursuing this case where the Espionage Act was extended in an unforeseeable manner. It had not been done before. There had been no extraterritorial application, which means that the Espionage Act had not been used to prosecute someone outside the United States and try to bring them here, put them on trial and basically enforce a U.S. secrecy law against that. Say, all right, even though you aren't an American, even though you aren't from here, you were expected to follow the U.S. secrecy law and not publish this classified information. That was something that Vanessa Barretzer disregarded, all those issues and how it changed the politics there, but also the time that it took to indict, how you have that time between publication from 2010 to 2017 was a secret sealed indictment, but then it isn't public and he isn't arrested until 2019. You have all of this time that creates this injustice and era of oppression within the case. So that brings us to where we are now. So there's a year missing in my timeline. You might have figured that out. Let me make sure I cover that, because immediately they filed an appeal, Assange's legal team did. And then they waited and they waited. And this legal limbo has defined a lot of this case. The legal limbo, the waiting, the tortuous manner in which some of these courts have just dragged their feet when it comes to issuing decisions, scheduling hearings. And that was the case with the High Court. Absurdly, or if you're following this like the tragedy and farce that it is, it was Sir Jonathan Swift who took his sweet time to get a decision issued that was merely a few sentences of basically saying that the High Court was not going to hear Julian Assange's appeal. And it came almost a year after Julian Assange had submitted an appeal and asked the High Court for a review. They were then able to ask that the High Court of Justice reconsider this rejection. And that's where we are now. What we are going to observe, what some reporters with access are going to share testimony from, what Julian Assange's legal team will be challenging, what they will be trying to get the High Court of Justice to recognize is that there are grounds of appeal. They've been waiting to bring those grounds for appeal before the High Court of Justice, and tomorrow they get to make that presentation. And that's day X. That's the time that Julian Assange has to put this full case before these justices to argue points of the law, to look at the extradition treaty, and go through all of these issues that are a little mind-numbing to us, because what gets lost in it is the person who has been slowly degrading. And also, it might kind of sideline the bigger picture of world press freedom and what is being sacrificed here through the fact that the US government continues on with this case. But still, this is going to be a much different proceeding than the one that played out before the High Court previously. It's not about, oh, Julian Assange is a shell of a man and he can't think anymore and we need to save him, and that is why the charges should be dropped. This is on principles and values that are supposed to be important to democracy. This is going to be about fundamental issues of human rights beyond just the fact that a person should not be tortured. So let me just go to the comments here. Let me look here. This is from Jim. Thank you for tuning in. And Jim's a good supporter of the work that I do. And then Belinda is here. Hi, Kevin, I'm so angry that is not one thing on Australian TV about Julian's case today. Well, I can share with you that earlier I was on a breakfast program in New Zealand. I was grateful that they invited me on to their program to speak. It was fun because I'm not sure that the people getting up in the morning wanted to hear about this serious matter. The two hosts of the show were discussing whether they wanted to know from people, do you sleep with your spouse in the same bed? Or do you sleep in separate beds because it's good for your health and well-being? And at that moment, I knew that this is not the typical show that I go on, but it was good that I was being given a platform to put this story before an audience that probably wasn't thinking the way I am about how this is an urgent matter. And I hope I was able to put this on some Kiwis' radar, and they were in tune with the fact that Australia has passed this motion in Parliament that says that they are against the extradition of Julian Assange. Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese backed this motion. The politics have shifted in Australia dramatically. That's one positive aspect of the passage of time. All this time that keeps going and going and going. It is limbo for Julian Assange, but there are signs on the ground that progress has been made to convert people and to have people understand that they must get past these personal hangups that they have about Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. They must look in the mirror and figure out where they got these preconceived notions about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. What was this that you heard? Where did it come from? Who made you think this way? Because more than likely, it's not based in the reality of what has happened. And so I'm glad I was able to be on a show like that. I like going on shows like that, uh, meeting new people or being able to speak to a new audience. There was a lawyer who lives in The Hague, Netherlands, and I think he works at The Hague, and he invited me on his show. He does a show for people who listen to metal music. I was invited on, and I spoke for an hour with him about this case. I want people who are not normally spending every day and hour worried about what will happen to Assange to take a moment to consider the significance of what we see unfolding here. So I put together this rundown. I put together this countdown to day X. And I went through the several issues that we are going to see discussed in the appeal hearing. And then there was one at the end that I reminded people of. So I encourage you once again to go to thedissenter.org, catch up on that countdown to day X. There are 9 articles. I said I would do a 10-part series. There's a 10th article that I am going to call a part of the series because finally, we're seeing some progressive media give space to this case. And they should. And they should give more, and there should be urgency, and there should be an effort to ask questions about why this isn't more of a political issue. Why isn't this more of a priority within the United States Congress to challenge President Joe Biden and the Justice Department to, at minimum, justify what they're doing? But I also think we don't want to hear their justifications. Why are you continuing this case with charges that should be dropped, that are not defensible, that were not defensible under Obama? Vice President Joe Biden was in the Obama administration. How is this departure from that administration, which Trump's administration undertook? How is that legitimate and defensible? And there should be questions from representatives, senators. There should be a challenge from within the legislative branch to what is happening, because the First Amendment is at risk. Because the idea of global press freedom that the US State Department claims to promote is being grossly undermined by pressing onward with this case. Let me go to the comments and then I'll continue here. SW Haste, I just don't understand how this is legal and permitted. My response to that is the legal system is merely a cloak for a political action that has been undertaken. Like I say in the subtitle of my book, this is the political case against Julian Assange. It's politics. If there were crimes that Julian Assange had committed, they would have been immediately prosecuted. If it was, as the Justice Department puts on their site, part of the fundamental interest of society, to prosecute Julian Assange, then they would have. But Eric Holder, who was Attorney General, others working within the Justice Department National Security Division, they were able to live with themselves. They said, we took actions against WikiLeaks. They took actions I don't support. They instituted a national insider threat task force. They put that in to the US government, and they made it possible to expand the intrusive surveillance against government employees and contractors. They created a kind of culture where people would keep looking over their shoulder. You know, they were encouraged to inform on their colleagues. There could be, at one point, they were offering rewards for information. Do you know someone who's planning to leak? Is there somebody you think who might be unstable and could turn into someone who would disclose information to the press without authorization? We need you to help us. We need to stop them immediately. The national security of the United States is under threat. That was the culture that President Obama fostered by establishing this insider threat program. That was the response to WikiLeaks. There was this paranoia, a kind of hysteria too. Don't look at the WikiLeaks documents. If you see them, you better sanitize your computer. You better go tell somebody, tell a superior officer in the military. You're not allowed, if you're a soldier, to go to WikiLeaks and read a WikiLeaks document, even though it might benefit you in your duties, in your job or your role as a military officer. Same goes for any government employee who didn't have a security clearance, on their computer. Don't open WikiLeaks. It would taint your computer. This was the climate that was created by President Barack Obama. I didn't support that, but in the end, he did not indict Julian Assange, and he had an opportunity to do so. And then WikiLeaks helped Edward Snowden escape from Hong Kong. And Barack Obama was thinking about, his administration was wondering, should we go after him for source protection? I still don't think he should have done it. He shouldn't have gone after Julian Assange for trying to protect a source who exposed massive NSA surveillance programs that were threatening the privacy of not just Americans, but everyone around the world, entire countries being swept up by the NSA. But he didn't indict Julian Assange then. He didn't indict Julian Assange earlier. Attorney General Eric Holder passed on it. And then we come to President Donald Trump's administration, and that's when it takes a turn. And you never would have expected it would take a turn with President Donald Trump. For everything that was out there, you saw that he was talking about the Hillary Clinton emails that were being published at WikiLeaks. But as it turns out, President Donald Trump picks people, they play parts, they run agencies, and they do what they're doing. And as long as they don't get in the way of Donald Trump, he really doesn't care about them. So he picked Mike Pompeo to run the CIA, and he picked Jeff Sessions to run the Justice Department. And then Bill Barr succeeded Jeff Sessions after Jeff Sessions fell out of favor with Donald Trump. Between those three individuals, none of them were on the side of press freedom. They were fine with altering media policy guidelines so that media organizations could be subpoenaed, so that they could be threatened with prosecution, legal jeopardy. They were willing to go after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in a manner that had not been seen before. Now we're talking about the CIA allegedly running an operation that targets the Ecuador embassy in London and has a private security company from Spain basically outsourced to do this work, to collect it all, to use a motto from the NSA, to collect it all and send dossiers on visitors to the embassy, people who are meeting with Assange, send that information over to American intelligence, which we learned later from whistleblowers in UC Global was the CIA, which we know from David Morales's computer. He's the UC Global director. He had a folder labeled CIA. He was collaborating with the CIA. They were targeting WikiLeaks with a disruption campaign. They wanted chaos and disorder to plague WikiLeaks. If you believe the reporting from over 30 sources, that's right, Yahoo News reporters spoke to over 30 sources, and this was a few years ago. And those sources were in the Trump administration. They were from other agencies. They had national security backgrounds. They had a way, we presume, of knowing what was going on within the Trump administration. And they found that Pompeo was out of his mind. He was vengeful. He was furious. WikiLeaks had published the Vault 7 materials from, Joshua Schulte was just convicted of leaking those materials to WikiLeaks. But he saw this largest leak of information in the history of the CIA that exposed the hacking materials or the hacking capabilities of the CIA. Everyone's talking about what the CIA can do to compromise Apple computers and phones and target software and plant malware and all of that. And Pompeo was interested in developing sketches of plans to kidnap, to rendition Assange, to poison, or even kill Julian Assange. That's what was reported. Allegedly, those are the discussions that took place behind closed doors. And from there, that's how we get to the arrest. The Justice Department, if you read the Yahoo report, they are spooked by the spooks, and they believe that if they don't indict Julian Assange, it's a very real possibility that Julian is going to arrive at the U.S. shore. He's going to be brought by a jet, and when he lands, they're going to be caught with their pants down, and they won't know what to do because they don't have charges. So the U.S. will be exposed as a lawless state. So they need to quickly indict him on something, anything, so that they can make sure that nothing terrible happens. And the terrible is not Julian Assange having his rights violated and brought to the U.S. for a trial. The terrible is that people might actually see that the United States government doesn't always follow the rule of law, doesn't always really care that much about how justice is meted out to people. And so this is where we are. We are now at this place where we are awaiting a decision from the High Court of Justice. We will be waiting for it. We will be following all of the arguments that are put forward by Assange's legal team. We will be hoping that maybe this can make some kind of difference to Assange, but even Stella herself says that she does not expect the legal system to spare Julian Assange. Even she says that, well, look, I'll just go to Cat Whatever over here, who seems to be where I am right now. Why do we expect justice from the US, UK governments? But I don't want to give up either. And that's the thing. So what Stella has told people is that we need a political solution. That isn't to say that Joe Biden is going to save Julian Assange. I don't expect him to do that. That's not to say that Attorney General Merrick Garland is on the side of Julian Assange and will save him. I don't see any evidence that Attorney General Merrick Garland is willing to do that for Julian Assange. It isn't to say that the Australian government is going to put pressure on the US government so that they can get their citizen back, so that this saga can come to an end finally. I don't think they're willing to go far enough to create tension between the US to really use their leverage that they would have, because the US does want to use Australia in the region in order to challenge China. But that doesn't matter, because there are always these moments that surprise us. There are moments where we're not sure how we got to them, but we know that somehow by struggling, it was important to the fight. And we see that it wasn't all for nothing, that we were struggling and making these appeals for justice, demanding that press freedom be respected, etc. I always raise the example of Obama commuting the sentence of Chelsea Manning. If you had told me that she was not going to serve the full 35-year prison sentence after she was convicted and sentenced in that military court martial, I would not have believed you. It just wouldn't have crossed my mind that Barack Obama would show mercy. But there were people who were organizing, there was pressure. There were influential people who went to Obama and said that it was wrong that she received such a harsh and extraordinary sentence. And it was disturbing what she was going through while incarcerated at Fort Leavenworth Military Prison. And so she was set free. And we want the same for Julian Assange. We want this pressure to be ramped up. We want for someone in some high place to reach elites, to reach the people who have their hands on the levers and can make this stop. And that's what this is all about. This is this organizing, these rallies that take place. There's a countdown, or there's a day X 24-hour video stream on Stella Assange's YouTube channel. I contributed a video, and there are voices that are popping up from all over that contributed to that 24-hour stream. You should go through it and see some of the people, see some of the clips. You obviously can't watch all 24 hours, but catch some of it. I'm kind of cutting into it. But I wanted to get my views out here. It's been a while since I had done a stream on this channel. Life's been pretty busy lately. So this is a moment which we mobilize. We've called it Day X. We've raised people's attention. We've got engagement, and we need to take this and make it into something that impresses upon people the fact that the legal system can't be the thing that we let play out. We don't want to see if Julian Assange prevails before the European Court of Human Rights. We don't want to see if Julian Assange can come to the US, be put on trial, and beat this in a US court. Because just because he wins in a US court, even if he does, that's something we're talking about happening 3 or 4 years from now. We didn't even know if he would survive detention. He would be in Alexandria City Jail. The evidence that was presented is that he would be put in administrative segregation. That's the euphemism. Those are the words that the US government used to describe solitary confinement. We heard this ludicrous line from Gordon Kromberg, who is the lead prosecutor on this case. And he said something like, Julian Assange would be able to talk through the doors or the windows of his cell to other people while he's in solitary confinement. If that seems absolutely bananas, you're right. It is, because those are thick steel doors. The windows aren't even really windows. It's kind of a like mesh plexiglass. You have to scream at the top of your lungs. There was a public defender named Yancey Ellis who testified during the extradition trial and spoke about the time that he had been there visiting a detainee who he was representing, and he would have to ask the guards to open the food door, the door that you put the food tray through, and that way he could talk to his client, the person he was representing in this case. And that's what you have to do. There's no Julian Assange socializing in solitary confinement. And obviously, that makes sense. This is not the point of solitary confinement. If you were going to have prisoners talking to each other, you would put them in general population. Then you would allow them to associate, meet with each other, talk to each other while they're eating their meals. But they want to isolate Julian Assange because he is a high profile defendant and because they don't want him to speak to other prisoners about what he has done and what he knows, and to share his experience about how the US government has abused and mistreated him for all of these years. So we can expect, if he goes to Alexandria, which, by the way, that was where Chelsea Manning was held for nearly a year, a grand jury, which it was raised earlier on, was not shut down by Eric Holder. You're absolutely right if you recall that, because one of the biggest problems here, and one of the things that is at the fault of the Obama Justice Department, is that they did not make a formal announcement shutting down the investigation into WikiLeaks. They did not make a formal announcement saying that Julian Assange would not be charged with any crimes going further and that it was over. So there wasn't a way for Julian Assange to feel that he was safe to leave the Ecuador embassy in London. So Chelsea Manning was brought before that grand jury, that same grand jury that Eric Holder impaneled. There were different iterations of it, but eventually the Trump administration was overseeing that grand jury. They start calling people back, subpoenaing them, and forcing them to testify. If they don't testify in those proceedings, then they'll be held in contempt and they would be jailed. Chelsea Manning refused to share information that would be used against Julian Assange. The source refused to help the government go after the editor of the media organization that published her leaks. She went to Alexandria City Jail, and she was there for nearly a year. Towards the end, she attempted suicide. And nobody in the facility stopped her. And that is the concern with Julian Assange, that his mental health has deteriorated. It has deteriorated so much that he will try to take his life, and that there will be no one there to stop him. And so here we are. We're discussing this Day X. We're discussing this appeal hearing that is upcoming. I need to start winding this down, but let me work in some of the details for those of you who have stayed here and are still watching this stream. I thank you for being here. I would like to remind everyone to go to thedissenter.org, subscribe, support this work, support this journalism. I've been working on this for 15 years. This goes all the way back to the Obama administration and the way it was abusing secrecy, keeping torture photos secret. And then WikiLeaks comes along, publishes military documents from Chelsea Manning that exposed the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The gap between what U.S. State Department diplomats say in public and what they do behind closed doors in private, that was made stark. That was thrown open. We were able to see just how much they are deceitful when it comes to diplomacy. And the Obama administration didn't like that, and that's why they were ready to go down any path to make sure that documents like that were not published on WikiLeaks ever again. And they had mixed success, right? They were able to definitely create a chilling effect for media sources. That was felt. So there was a media briefing I was able to tune into. The Media Entertainment and Arts Alliance had a media briefing. There's some things that are notable about tomorrow's hearing. First of all, I would say that Julian Assange has asked to be present at the hearing, but it's not a guarantee. The court does not have to allow Julian Assange to be present. You ask for permission to go there, and it's up in the air whether they're going to allow him to be there at this hearing. That's shameful. But the way that he's been handled and micromanaged in courts thus far has been one of many incredible aspects of this case. The hearing that I went to in February of 2020, they had him in a glass box. They kept him back there. It was like he was Saddam Hussein or some kind of dictator of a country that the United States had toppled. So that is going to be an uphill battle, possibly. But if he's not feeling well, he may choose to not go to that hearing. We learned from Rebecca Vincent, who is an international campaigns director for Reporters Without Borders and has been able to visit Julian Assange multiple times in Belmarsh, that he was sick around Christmas and he had excessive coughing, and the excessive coughing caused a rib to be broken. We learned during the extradition trial that he suffers from osteoporosis. These issues that I'm briefly mentioning will not be attended to by any health professionals in a U.S. detention facility or a prison. If you think that prison or detention health care is going to keep Julian Assange from ailing or being close to death, that's just not how it works. And that was one of the aspects that struck Vanessa Baretzer and made her feel that she needed to rule against extradition in the first place. And 90 to 95% of the extradition case seemed fair and reasonable. I disagree, but it seemed fair and reasonable to that judge. But looking her right in the face was this inhumanity that is systemic in many of our prisons and jails in the United States. And she just couldn't get over that. So he has to ask to be at the hearing. We don't know if Julian Assange will be present at the hearing. But we know it's 2 days. We know they'll present these arguments. The Crown Prosecution Service is there on behalf of the United States. The U.S. is not technically in the courtroom, but the Crown Prosecution Service is doing the work of the United States, trying to move this extradition to its final phase where Julian Assange can be put on a plane and brought to the U.S. And it's been spoken about, Stella has said that this could be his last public hearing, as I've been repeating. The hearing anything that happens next will turn on what happens in this hearing. She's seeking a political solution, Stella said. And yes, there's a possibility that the European Court of Human Rights can get involved. But if the European Court of Human Rights is hearing this petition and agrees to take it up as a matter before the court, he likely remains in Belmarsh. That's more incarceration. That's more deterioration of his health. That keeps this pending as a threat to world press freedom. Jen Robinson, an attorney for WikiLeaks, mentioned that there have been concerning developments between the UK and the European Court of Human Rights, and raised an important and salient issue, which is the European Court of Human Rights is looking at a United Kingdom government that does not really want to respect what that court does anymore, does not want to answer to the court's decisions. The European Court may not want to lose the UK, give it a reason to pull out. And so it is entirely possible that Julian Assange is sacrificed by the European Court of Human Rights. Although there have been some decisions that challenged the US government and maybe even the UK before, it is possible that they would allow the extradition and try to protect the inclusion and the membership of the UK in the European Court of Human Rights. So let me go back to the comments. Let's see what you all are saying here. And I need to start winding down here. I've been going for an hour, and need to share the 10th article from the Progressive once it gets published over at their publication, and need to start laying all of the pieces and make sure I have everything set for sharing reporting at the dissenter tomorrow on the appeal hearing. So let's see here. We have this compliment to me. Thank you. Your work is amazing and tireless, Kevin. Respect. Thank you. It's people like you who make it possible for me to do this. And I need to shout all of the people who gave donations in the past 10 days. There have been several of you that have been extremely generous. I don't know if you'll see the stream or watch it. Maybe I'll get around to sharing it, but I don't know because there's a lot going on right now. So it may be that the people who have been generous don't get to see this stream. But if you are out there and you've given money to make this work possible, I'm in debt to you, and thank you for supporting journalism on government secrecy, press freedom, and whistleblowers. It's definitely not the kind of reporting that gets the clicks. It's not the kind of reporting that all the time helps generate interest. It's certainly not gossip, but you all take an interest in this, and I'm glad that there's an audience out there who want to engage with this. And even if it's life-sucking, some of this is very, very hard to follow because we don't know what is going to happen, and everything looks like the outcome will be extremely distressing. Every day seems extremely distressing, but between all of us coming together, there's this hope that we can build a way out of here so that the First Amendment isn't sacrificed, so that the principles of press freedom that we need to defend are not sacrificed, so that Julian Assange could be spared, so that a family can continue to live on after this, so that he can go be in Australia, so he might be able to return and do some journalistic work, or we might be able to hear his voice and benefit from it later. That's what we are doing. And so here's a comment from Ransa. I miss Julian. I miss WikiLeaks journalism of 22nd century that by chance got into 21st. And that's an interesting perspective because they were well ahead of the way media did this kind of work, pioneering a secure submission system for leaks that now Freedom of the Press Foundation has popularized and called Secure Drop. There are over 75, or at least 75 media organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC News, ProPublica, other organizations that have this, that solicit leaks, that do the exact thing that Julian Assange has been criminalized for doing, that put on their websites potential leakers give us information in the public interest, and they are not in trouble. But Julian Assange is in detention at Belmarsh. And so I'm going to wind this down. The last few things that I have to say here, let's see if there's anything else from the briefing that is worth sharing with you on my way out of here. The most positive outcome possible is dropping the charges. That is what we fight for. It's not a pardon. He didn't do anything wrong. We do not want Joe Biden to pardon Julian Assange. We don't want a pardon to come from the Justice Department or any place else. It's to drop the charges because that will mean that this doesn't establish the precedent fully that something was wrong, that publishing those documents to WikiLeaks should not be done by any journalist or any media organization, that it is somehow wrong for anybody to set up a website that has an archive of documents that are being leaked to the public contemporaneously. That, it's okay. They accept that we can have a historical archive of material. We're always able to go over the injustices and crimes that were committed 25 and 30 years ago, but to expose them in real time is a thing that the US government fights to shut down. So it's a real overreach, as his people has said. We're talking about the end of national security journalism as we know it. That's another thing that Jen Robinson has said. That's a thing that a lot of press freedom organizations have said. So we go get a little bit of rest. We do this work tomorrow to follow the coverage. I'll share and promote and amplify the work. I'm not in London. I stayed in the United States. My commitment is to be in Alexandria, Virginia, if Julian Assange is brought to the United States for a trial. I will be one of the first people there to get into the courtroom and bear witness to what the US government is doing. But I intended to have remote access, and the courts decided that they were going to treat all journalists like a security threat, and only the ones living in England and Wales would be allowed to access a remote feed. And everybody else from around the world, if they wanted to be in the courthouse and see Julian Assange and observe the proceedings, they would have to travel, whether it meant coming 100 miles from 100 miles away, or they could go 10,000 miles, whatever it would take for them to get there. They would have to get themselves to the court, find a seat, get a credential for a seat, and that would be their only way to report. Otherwise, they'll have to rely on other reporters. So in a sense, I'm going to rely on another reporter. Tomorrow, Mohammed Almazi is going to have reporting through the Dissenter that I will share, and that will keep the Dissenter's unbroken pattern of coverage on Assange going. Almazi has helped before, Mohammed has helped before on this, and I expect that he'll do an excellent job covering these proceedings. And I'm glad to be able to give him a platform at the newsletter so that we can make sure people follow developments that are significant. He'll pick up on exchanges that I want to be shared with all of you. And I do care about how we get there. I care about how we get there. I am different from other US or Western reporters who are content to just tell you that, well, the High Court of Justice just ruled against Julian Assange. Oh, wow. Julian Assange is going to get a full hearing. The High Court of Justice just said he isn't going to be extradited, yet he'll be able to have a full appeal. Those are the two outcomes. That's the way that we expect things to happen next. But how do we get there? What are these high court people, these justices, going to say that again reveal the coldness of elites and the bias and the prejudice against Julian Assange? So I must go. I need to go. I thank you all for tuning in to this broadcast and supporting the work that I do, the work that others do. I'm not the only journalist that does this work. There's other people like Stefania Marizzi. I have a colleague named Chip Gibbons from Defending Rights and Dissent, who is going to be in the court in London. Rebecca Vincent does tremendous work for Reporters Without Borders. There's other groups like Freedom of the Press Foundation has been mobilizing, doing advocacy campaigning. There's a letter with law professors signed on that helped to amplify pressure on the Justice Department and Attorney General Merrick Garland. All of this is contributing to a point where I hope we will see Julian Assange walk free. But we're not going to get there yet. And we need to be around to bear witness to this hearing tomorrow. And so I will be there. And I hope you subscribe to the Dissenter if you're not already. And I will see you tomorrow. I'm hoping to pop my head out and do another broadcast. I'll do one on each of the days as I've done before during these court proceedings. So until then, sleep well if you can, and take care of yourselves. And I will talk to you again soon.